You're live on News at Prime. Thanks for staying with us tonight. Now, Friday marks the 7th anniversary of the Marikana massacre. Widows and activists have raised concern that little has changed for them. Joining us tonight to be part of our conversation, Petunia Lepaaku from Mabopane. Her husband was one of the officers who was killed on the 13th of August in 2012. Also part of the conversation in studio here in Linden, Nomza Mozondo from the Socio-Economic Rights Institute, as well as Muyedi. She's a director and filmmaker behind the Marikana massacre-inspired film, Mabopane. Well, we'll get to my guests in studio in a moment, and I thank you both for your time tonight. But Mam Petunia, I want to begin with you. Of course, the 13th is, I imagine, a difficult day for you and your family, as you have to remember what happened to the officer that was killed, who was also your husband. Tell us about what the 7 years has been like for you.
Cathy, I think those 7 years has been quite difficult because I don't think much has changed on those 7 years. Nothing has changed actually, because it's still the same. We are still suffering the same pain. And it's difficult, Cathy, to hear our husband's name every year with nothing at the back of it. It's very painful, Cathy. It's still painful, more especially from us, the family and his kids and everybody. I think we are still in pain.
Given the fact that your husband was one of the officers that, of course, came under attack, the expectation would be that perhaps there's a difference in how his case in particular is being handled. What do you know about the investigation to date? Has there been any kind of answers around who exactly was responsible for his death?
None. I never had anything from the investigating officers. I don't even remember them because it's quite 7 years ago. But I don't even know the people who killed my husband. I still don't know what happened. Why on the 13th of August 2012. I'm still in the dark. But I can hear that things are happening, but I don't know exactly what is really happening.
When you say that you don't know what happened, what were you told about how he died?
Honestly, if I can say, I have many visions of everybody who was of most people who were on the scene that I could ask what happened, but I don't get the answers that I was hoping for of what happened on the 13th of August. And I don't know exactly if I can say maybe this is the guy who killed my husband. I don't know that guy. I know that people are in court. I know that people have been prosecuted. People have been accusing each other, but I don't have anybody to accuse. I don't have anybody to blame at the present moment, because I can't even tell or what happened on this day. I can't even tell. I just see whatever is being broadcast on the media, but nobody ever came to me and said, Mrs. Lepaaku, this is the person who killed your husband, or this is exactly what happened on that fatal day.
So, when was the last time that any kind of officials had contact with you about this case at all?
Honestly, the people who I used to talk about this case, even though I could, by that time, I couldn't put myself to ask them some of those questions, was former General Pierre. I think I had a closed relationship with her. I could ask her some questions. I could talk to her about other things, and the previous Northwest Commissioner Membombo, she was the one whom I could call, but they all left, and I don't know anybody. I don't have anybody. Everybody just left with them.
All right. Ma'am Petunia, I'm going to ask you then to just stay on the line, and I'm going to bring this conversation in studio. From a legal perspective, I imagine that it's not extraordinary to hear what Ma'am Petunia is saying, because her story represents the story of so many answers, so many people who are, number one, still looking for answers.
Look, I mean, it's quite sad, because in the ordinary process of prosecution, in any case, if your brother is killed, your husband is killed, the police come to you and tell you at every step of the investigation how far the investigation has gone. Before there's any prosecution, they come and tell you, we've now finalized the case, we're going to prosecute these people for what they've done to your husband. So for instance, it's very sad for me hearing Lepaaku speaking like this, because her experience is the experience of the widows in Marikana whose husbands were killed by the police. Strangely, yesterday, 5 policemen were in court for the death of her husband and the death of 4 other people. But the fact that she doesn't know is what I know my clients keep saying. The NPA and IPID has not been open about this prosecution to any of the victims. And it's unacceptable. You know, it's unacceptable that 7 years later, she would have to worry about who she knows to get those answers, because as a citizen of this country, as a person here, she has a right to expect that information will be brought to her, to tell her that this is what we are doing about your loss. This is what you're doing about the killing of your husband. And it's really unacceptable that she has to be in this position.
And just to backtrack there, you said that as far as you know, there was a case in court yesterday that involved her husband's murder.
Yes, so there have been 5 policemen who have been charged with the 5 people who died on the 13th of August. 3 of them are mine workers, and they are represented by our office. 2 of them are the policemen, including her husband. And those 5 policemen who appeared in court to actually have the case heard. So in fact, Mrs. Lepaaku should have been told that on the 12th of August, people will be in court about the death of your husband. You should come and hear what has to be said, right? Exactly, because she has the complaint of many other people. But secondly, that case has now been postponed to the 20th of April next year until the 8th of May. So again, I would, in this kind of situation, if it was a normal murder, the police would have come and said, yes, there was a date, but it's now not proceeding for these reasons. And Mrs. Lepaaku shouldn't have to come and make that complaint here to the media. Someone should have spoken to her. And as she spoke earlier, unfortunately, so much of Marikana has been to the media, for the media, but very little has been about these families and for these families. And I think this is the complaint, and I hope someone out there is listening in the government as a whole, in SAPS, in the NPA, in IPID, to ask them, how are they engaging with these victims? Are they finding time to go to the home of Mrs. Lepaaku and say, this is how far we are?
Ria, that's one of the reasons why you found that the stories of many of these widows also resonated and in fact needed to be documented.
I mean, my film focuses on one story and one family, and I think that when we speak about massacres or you know, deaths and tragedies, we look at a broader picture and not really focus and hone in on individual stories and how they've left individuals affected. So this is why my film focuses specifically on the loss of one mother, one family, one wife, and their children.
All right. Ma'am Petunia, I wonder if you can still hear me clearly. We heard now, of course, from one of the legal experts in studio with us that, in fact, one of the cases that relates to your husband was in court yesterday. What does it feel to hear that, you know, that this process has been going on seemingly without you and without your knowledge?
Cathy, as I said before, that things are happening and we are not aware. More especially if I can say I am not aware. I just heard in the news while I was driving from work that the police officers were in court. And I was so amazed that why wasn't I told? Why wasn't I informed about this? Or maybe it wasn't maybe important for me to know about this. Maybe this information is for maybe certain people. I wasn't maybe involved. I don't know why I wasn't told, but I was never told anything. There was the guy from iPad I met, I think 2 months ago. No, I think somewhere last year when General Mpembe was summoned. He only told me that, okay, General Mpembe is being summoned and then he's going to court. I don't remember the guy's name, but then, since then, I never saw anybody.
All right, we're going to leave it there for now. We'll continue our conversation. Petunia Lepaaku from Mabopane, her husband was a police officer who was killed on the 13th of August. Also in studio with me, Nomzamo Zondo, she's from Seri, and Ria Moeti, she's a director and filmmaker. She's documented one of the stories relating to the Marikana massacre. We'll continue this conversation in a short while. You're live on News at Prime. While we continue our conversation here, Friday marking the 7th anniversary of the Marikana massacre, many widows and activists this week raising concerns about how little has changed in terms of life for the families of those affected. We're joined by Petunia Lepaaku from Mabopane. Her husband was one of the officers killed on the 13th of August. Joining the conversation is also Nomzamo Zondo from the Socio-Economic Rights Institute, as well as Ria Moeti. She's a director and filmmaker behind the Marikana massacre inspired film Mamwekezi, and we'll show you a little bit of what that documentary has been like. Mam Petunia, I just want to begin with you again. Please speak to us about what the impact of the loss of your husband has been on your family. How have you been trying to get through these 7 years?
Cathy, my husband left me with our 3 kids. I've got a daughter and 2 sons. The last one is 10 years now. And that is a very painful situation whereby you have to be a single parent in one day. It's not nice. I have to answer to my kids. I can't tell them what is really happening, what happened to their dad. It's painful for me not to answer on my 10-year-old or what happened to his dad, because I still don't know or what happened exactly. But all in all, my kids are grown. Life goes on, even though it is tough. It's still painful.
And I wonder, what are the kind of questions that your children are asking? You speak about a 10-year-old. They would have been 3 by the time that, you know, their father was killed. What are the kind of questions they want to have answered?
Firstly, my 10-year-old doesn't know his dad. He doesn't remember daddy at all because he was still young, and I have to answer what happens to his father, what happens to daddy, and I don't think I'm comfortable to answer now or what happened to daddy, because I think that is going to traumatize him. And every time when you see a story of Marikana, then the kids will always say, "Mommy, that story is coming again." It's very painful. because we can't forget. We are not given the chance to heal as a family, but then we are not given the reason to cry, because nobody is telling us why we shouldn't cry. Everybody just left us in the dark. We are being left alone, and then just to pick up the pieces, everybody just left. Marikana happened. Some people are happy, but we are not happy. Some people have got closure, but we don't have closure. We don't have the reason to, I can't proudly say my husband was working for the South African Police Services. I would never say that, because the South African Police Services just left us, and they promised on the first day that they will always be here. They promised that they will always take care of us, but nobody's taking care of us. So everybody, they want us to just follow them. People can't just do what they promised. They can't fulfill their promise. So what I want to say is, South Africa have just left us. We are only here to pick up the pieces. The promise that were made on the 19th of August 2012, nobody's doing those promises.
It must be quite a letdown, especially given the fact that your husband was part of the state machinery, and he on any given day would have been taking orders and acting on behalf of the state. So, you know, as far as the calling then, where police officers are concerned, when you look at his death, do you think that it was at all in vain?
It was in vain. It was in vain, and nobody even recognized it. Nobody even can tell me how my husband died. Nobody even recognized, they can't even remember the scars that my husband had on the day of his death. And I don't like to compare, but I think we are widows, but not the same widows. I still believe our death, our husband's death, some of us, our husbands, I think they deserved to die. For the fact that they died while saving their country, that doesn't count right now in South Africa.
All right. Thank you so much, Ma'am Petunia, and condolences again to you and your family. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us. So I'm going to come back to studio and try and continue this conversation then. And, you know, we've been hearing the stories over the last couple of days. And I think that particular interview just paints the pain of so many families, including the widows that you are trying to help in your particular court case. Namsan?
Look, I think listening to Mama Petunia, I could have been listening to Mama Nungu, to Mama Gadlela, to any of the other 37 family members, 37 families who are affected here, because they have the very same complaint. And they always assume the treatment of the other is better, exactly because in addressing the massacre, no one cared about ensuring that there's healing across the board. No one made sure there was reconciliation across the board. I think, in fact, everyone expected that from the victims, but no one who was outside the process thought, I should bring these people together. And I think the problem, unfortunately, is because SAPS, right, who is at the center of this, I want to put it like that, who's at the center of this, has never at any point been willing to take some capability and lead the process of healing for Mohlahlana Lepaaku, but also lead the process of healing for Mamati. They've never done that. In fact, as she says, we're still part of a big blame game. Yeah. Every time someone asks for justice, then we need to compare that the other person didn't get justice. But everybody must get justice. The families, the 7 families that I represent, know that their humanity, their search for justice is also part of her search for justice. They know that the pain that she's going through is the same pain they go through. They also have children who were born a day after the massacre, who don't know their fathers. And they know that Petunia Lepaaku is feeling the very same pain, and that their children feel the very same pain. But there's never been anyone who's made that space possible for that conversation to happen.
And so I think that part of that narrative that we saw post the massacre of an us and them then continues to be perpetuated in the space then of that silence and that vacuum. Mam Petunia says something important that we must never forget. What is the role of memory and, you know, the kind of work that you've done in making sure that the stories of these women and these families really reaches audiences beyond South Africa's borders?
I mean, I think it's important to use art and to use the resources that we have in terms of storytelling to make sure that the memories are there, but not necessarily to bring pain every year, but for us not to forget our history, to not forget the country's mistakes, and to learn from them. And also, I mean, I think that, you know, this tragedy and South African tragedies, which is the kind of filmmaking that I'm, you know, interested in, is a learning curve for the sort of journey of democracy and of reparation that we're going through as a country. And I think that it's important to keep making stories that remind us of this and to keep basically all of us in check.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we're going to then leave our audience with a trailer from that movie. But before we go away, of course, our guest tonight, Petunia Lepaaku from Mabopane. Let me thank her for her time and for sharing her story with us. Her husband was one of the police officers that was killed on the 13th. Nomzamo Zondo is from the Socioeconomic Rights Institute. She represents some of the widows of the miners that were killed, and Riamwedi is a director and filmmaker, and in fact she's produced the Mamweketsi, which is a Marikana inspired film. Let's take a look at that trailer. On the other side of this, Mark is standing by. He'll have your sport.
What's about Tipi? Tiki mamela ka taba tsa strike tsena radio nyaka. Ho boima ka nnete.
Bana ba rona ba shwa ba sebetsa di-mining, ba sebeletsa lefela. Gone ba shwa ba lwanela lefela.